What's the stupidest way you got laid? When I graduated from college, I went to a graduation party that must have had a couple thousand people. I stepped outside for a smoke and noticed a guy dressed like a Catholic priest. I told him it wasn't a costume party and that a costume like that didn't really tickle my funny bone. He replied that it wasn't a costume. He was there to see how the youths were celebrating their accomplishment. We started going back and forth about religion, and he asked me why I wasn't more devoted. I replied, there are too many things I disagree with in the Bible. At this point, a small crowd gathered around us to hear the discussion. Among the 8 to 10 people listening, there was a cute brunette. The priest asked me for examples of what I disagreed with. I told him I liked my gay friends and wouldn't want to stone them or discriminate against them for their sexuality. The cute brunette chimed in with a loud yeah. I told him I didn't like the way women are viewed in religion. She said, yay again. I added that marking human desires as sins is wrong, and, for example, if two consenting adults want to have some fun with a casual hookup, they should be able to. The cute brunette responded once more, damn right. I asked the priest, what's stopping me and, for example, the cute brunette from just going back to my place right now and having some fun? She said, exactly, we could do it right now. I turned to her and said, hi, I'm Oak Heathen. Want to go have some consenting fun for the thrill of it? She said yes. And that's the story of how a priest got me laid. Story 2. I met a girl at work and started hanging out with her, but I was a virgin and wanted my first time to be with someone I loved. After a couple of weeks of seeing each other almost daily, during which she was constantly trying to sleep with me, we finally ended up at my place late one night. We had been making out. Then she started giving me blowy. At first, it seemed exciting, but as she continues, it was awful, painful, and was downright uncomfortable. I tried to suggest things, but nothing helped, so I told her flatly it wasn't going to work and asked her to leave. She insisted she wouldn't go until I was done, and when I tried to tell her it was fine, she got upset and a little loud. I still lived with my parents at the time, and it was only tens of minutes before their usual wake-up, so I was worried. I was still angry, and my little guy was still up, so I went to work for 1.5 minutes and ended it. I did it so this girl would leave. Things with her didn't last more than a few days after that. Story 3. My Brazilian best friend and I went to one of his Latin clubs so he could meet up with one of his potential hookups, who, funny enough, was his mother's pedicurist. I was mostly there to play the wingman, maybe meet someone myself, but I wasn't drinking since I was driving. My Portuguese only extended to asking someone to give up or calling for a handball penalty, so my game wouldn't have been much use anyway. As my friend started convincing this girl to take him back to her place, one of his former hookups showed up and began blocking him. Not knowing a single word of Spanish or Portuguese, I honestly thought he was about to have a threescore and I'd end up being the Uber for the whole night. My friend leaned over to me and whispered, please, take the ex-hookup and keep her preoccupied. We went back to his current hookup's apartment and I did my best to keep his ex busy, mostly relying on hand gestures and laughing at my own jokes since she barely spoke any English. While my friend disappeared into the bedroom with his date, the ex pulled me into the kitchen and things quickly escalated. Eventually, we ended up in the guest room, where she had far more energy than I could handle. I kept telling her I needed agua, promising I'd be right back, and used the chance to make a quick escape. To my surprise, my friend had already passed out on the couch while his date was in the kitchen cooking. I shook him awake and said, we need to leave, right now. I wonder if she still thinks I'm getting water. Story 4. My cousin came over to my apartment with her roommate after celebrating her 21st birthday. Keep in mind, my roommates and I fully intended to just smoke and play video games all night. My cousin needed a place to stay, so I was fine with her coming over. Little did I know, her roommate was a special kind of crazy, like an anomaly. She was a National Blue Ribbon Horse Show winner with crazy rich parents, but she looked like she had just crawled out from behind the bleachers at a small-town basketball game. What made this dumb was the sheer number of factors that should have counted against any chance of me getting laid. Skyrim was still pretty new, so I had no intention of stopping my level grind just because a couple of drunk girls came over. I was high, so as far as I knew, I was a wizard. Meanwhile, my two roommates were actively trying to flirt with both my cousin and her roommate. I'm not exactly sure how everything led up to this, but at some point the crazy roommate decided she wanted to do it with the uninterested high guy. So there I was, leveling my blacksmithing, when suddenly I felt cold fingers on my leg. You might be wondering what words she chose to go along with this. She said, "You know I've played this game before too. I play a melee character, so I'm really good with joysticks." Ignoring my internal gamer monologue, who was poised to correct her statement, I caught wind of where this might go and proceeded to follow her to the bedroom. Story 5. At a house party where I knew most of the people, there was a group of girls I hadn't met before. One of my buddies, who's gay, tends to get even gayer when he's drunk, and when he's like that, he really likes pointing out certain things. Through our circle of friends, word had apparently gotten around that I'm not exactly small downstairs. This drunk idiot wandered over to the group of unfamiliar girls across the room, pointed at me, and said something I couldn't hear. I knew what he had said, and I was honestly upset. It felt weird having a guy go around telling all those girls that, but this wasn't just any guy. It was a gay guy, whose word somehow seems to carry weight with women. Later that night, a bunch of people were sitting in a circle on the floor. One of the girls from that group came over, sat down next to me, and casually placed her hand on my leg. I literally didn't speak a word to her until we were upstairs in a bedroom. Story 6. My next-door neighbor in college had a corrupted operating system. She needed to write some papers and had all her photos and files on that drive. I saw her crying on the back balcony while trying to call Geek Squad or University Tech Support as I was outside beating the dust out of a rug. I asked what was wrong, and she said her computer was broken. I offered to take a look and found that her OS was corrupted. I pulled her drive, connected it to my hub to recover her files, and then reinstalled Windows 7. I got her computer back up and running. She gave me a big hug and kissed me on the cheek, asking how much she owed me. I was hungry after working outside on the rug earlier, so I jokingly told her to give me some food. We ended up having manicotti together, and then unexpectedly, things escalated and we ended up doing it. Afterwards, I clogged her toilet, so we never talked after this. Story 7. I was in the Coast Guard during Katrina. A few hundred of us were sent to a town about 100 miles outside New Orleans. One night, I went out drinking with a buddy and his girlfriend. We were all staying two to a room in a local motel. After the bar closed, the three of us caused some chaos in the motel and then headed back to his girlfriend's room. By that time, what remained of Hurricane Rita was hitting the area and the weather outside was getting pretty rough. Her roommate hadn't gone out and was lying in bed. They told me I could stay there rather than go back outside to my room. I was really drunk and would have had no trouble sleeping on the floor, but the roommate offered that I could take the bed. I mentioned that my jeans were soaked, so I changed into something dry. I got into bed and we ended up chatting and laughing together. Within minutes, it turned into a very unexpected and intense night right there with my friend and his girlfriend in the next bed, oblivious to the chaos. The next morning, I realized she was actually very attractive. Not a 10, but definitely a cutie, and nothing to be ashamed of. I've never been great at picking up girls at a bar, yet there I was, completely wasted, and she was completely sober, and somehow I ended up with her without saying more than a few words. Story 8. I broke up with my ex-girlfriend and was feeling pretty down. A good friend suggested I go to a house party with him and a few buddies. I initially turned him down, but he convinced me by saying there'd be a girl there who could help me get over my ex. I went, and things went as expected, but that wasn't the odd part. The following weekend, there was another house party at the same place, with many of the same people, including the girl I'd hooked up with the previous weekend. My friend tried to set me up with a redhead who would be there, assuring me she wasn't that kind of girl. I tried my best to impress her, but it didn't work, though I did get her number. The second time I ran into the redhead, we got pretty drunk, and she invited me to a bedroom, but I was too intoxicated to go. Trying not to blow my chance, I thought to myself, if I can just get things going, maybe I can salvage this. I leaned in a little too aggressively, and the loudest fart of my life escaped. We were face to face as the sound erupted. I nervously asked, "What was that?" "You farted," she replied, matter-of-factly. Not ready to give up, I jokingly asked, "Are you sure that wasn't you?" "Yes," she said firmly. I laughed, embarrassed, and passed out from the combination of nerves and alcohol. 4 years later, we were married. Story 9. In my second year of college, I went to a house party with my roommates. After an hour or so of drinking and socializing, one of the girls we were with went to smoke a cigarette. About 30 seconds later, I noticed she was standing in the next room, struggling to open a bedroom door. I walked over, still relatively sober, and opened it for her. There was no trick. It wasn't locked or anything. I just turned the knob and pulled. She grabbed her pack of smokes and asked if I wanted one. I'm not really a smoker, but I was drinking and this girl I'd just met offered me a cigarette, so I said sure. We were on the second floor balcony for a bit when things quickly escalated. She was very drunk, so she handed me her keys and we ended up heading back to her place. At this point, I'd known her for less than an hour and still didn't even know her name. The next morning, I had her put herself in my phone so I could figure it out in a non-awkward way. We're still together almost 5 years later. Story 10. In my 20s, my fondness for insane girls led to some spectacular train wrecks. After another dramatic relationship meltdown, I bought a pin that said temporarily celibate as a reminder to fly solo for a while. That pin was like a magic item. Honestly, the crazier a girl was, the stronger its effect. The girl who stole my car because she felt threatened by my new job saw the pin and treated it as a challenge. The woman I dated for 6 months, who never mentioned she was married to a member of the Volunteer Sheriff's Reserve, brought up the pin when I stepped up to her teller window, which led to coffee and semi-regular meetups for rowdy antics. The girl who stole a pound of opium from her girlfriend's Persian sugar daddy and told me about the fixers he had looking for her, but only after I had driven her to a motel to lay low, took me home after seeing the pin on open mic night at a coffee house and teasing me about it. The girl I later had a restraining order against saw me wearing the pin when we met at a party. Train wreck. After train wreck, the only common factors were the pin and my own stupid, crazy mind. After the reserve sheriff incident, I ritually burned the pin over tequila and barbecue with my buddies. No one should wield that kind of power or carry such a curse. Story 11. It was a cool fall morning, with not a cloud in the sky. It was my first time at Oktoberfest, and I wanted to experience as much as possible. I woke up early, and my friends and I got ready and boarded the train to München. Once we arrived, we followed the horde of thousands of people walking to the festival. At the festival, we stood in line for the tent to open around 9 o'clock in the morning. By 10, we were drunk. I'm talking about probably 12 Dunkel Bros, and I was even grabbing friends' unattended drinks and chugging them. Some of those may have actually belonged to strangers, but I guess it seemed more cost-effective at the time. Then, we met some college girls around our age, which basically meant they had impressive figures and were in our line of sight. We exchanged a few words, and they sat down with us. At this point, it's a blur, but somehow, I ended up making out with one girl, all in public with thousands of people around. She grabbed my arm and pulled me away. We walked to an absolutely gorgeous cathedral with stunning architecture you just don't find in America. We went there and did it. Yes, I am aware that if there is a hell, I am going. What happened to my friends, you might ask? Well, one of them was getting a blowy on a Ferris wheel and ended up the most sober of us all, inflicting the least damage on himself or others. Another ended up on the massive hill where all the drunk people passed out with 2 of the girls, using my digital camera to record the most incredible footage I've ever seen of a drunk guy rambling about the day, all while trying to hook up with both girls. Fortunately, I still have all the videos and photos he took if I ever want to take a trip down cringe lane. 2 of the other guys I came with were MIA. It turned out both ended up sleeping outside. One had a park bench he shared with his chosen lady. The other chose a bush to lie down in. It was by far the worst intimate experience I have ever had, though I am not exactly ashamed. She was incredibly attractive, and the experience as a whole is something I will never forget. I was simply fortunate to be there at that exact moment. That is the only reason I got laid that day. I hardly spoke to her or said anything of real significance. I know what you are thinking, but I am, and always have been, free of any transmitted diseases. I did not learn a single thing. I gained no valuable insight from the experience that would help me in the future. I was merely a means to an end, I suppose. Story 12. This happened around the time I was about to enter college. There was a guy I knew who worked at a coffee shop near my old high school. A genuinely nice guy. His niece was visiting, about my age, maybe a little older. He kept telling me what a wonderful person she was and that I should meet her. I was hesitant at first, but he insisted, take her out for pizza or something, show her around. Eventually, I agreed. What did I have to lose? We met up, she was cute, and naturally, I took her out for a couple of beers. After a few drinks, we headed back to her place. From here on, things get a bit cringeworthy. We walked into the house, and her uncle was there. She waved to him casually, then turned to me and asked if I wanted her to show me her bedroom. I felt awkward and said something like, maybe I should go. Both of them insisted I stay. If I had slept with anyone in the past year, I would have declined and gotten the heck out of there. But desperate needs call for desperate measures. Her uncle said he would be watching TV for the rest of the night and that we should just act like he wasn't there. So we headed to her bedroom, and I fulfilled my so-called duty as a man. For the record, I did not even enjoy it. The thought of her uncle watching TV just 2 rooms away made me tense. She noticed and asked a couple of times, "Are you okay? Why do you look so pale? Relax." After it was over, I naturally regained my common sense and returned to a fully functioning state. That was when I realized just how messed up the whole situation was. As I was heading out, her uncle winked at me and offered me a beer. I accepted, of course. I can never say no to a beer. I ended up watching TV with both of them for the rest of the night. I have not seen either of them since the day I left that place. Story 13. I studied computing at a textiles college in my hometown of all places. As it turned out, they offered a surprisingly good computer science degree focused on CAD/CAM and industrial applications in textiles and fashion design. Sounds a bit unusual, right? The upside of this arrangement was that the college had a large fashion and design student body, mostly female, around 70% of the total student population. Towards the end of the year, the graduating fashion and design students would host a fashion show and a gallery-style presentation of their work for their final grades, as well as for their families to see what they had spent the last 5 years creating. To cut a long story short, it was quite a challenge for the fashion and design students to set up an automated slideshow for their booths or displays. This was back in the days of DOS 6 when there was nothing freely available that could easily display output from their fashion CAD projects. This is where I came in, a freshman computer science student. I had been asked if I could help a group of students out, and that is exactly what I did every year. I used a simple program I'd written to display a sequence of TGA images in high resolution, looping through them with a variety of transition effects. The entire program took me about 6 hours to write one evening, and setup time for each student's display was roughly 30 minutes. The graduating students I helped, all female, were always incredibly thankful. They had been stressing out for weeks about not being able to create an automated slideshow, at least until my senior lecturer pointed them in my direction. They would invariably offer to pay me back somehow, not with money, but with a few beers, a home-cooked dinner, that sort of thing. I always told them it wasn't necessary. I was just happy to help. But they would insist. As it turned out, my little program worked extremely well, and they were thrilled with the results, not to mention the boost it gave to their final grades. They would take me out for a few beers, hang out, or cook me dinner. More than a few, though, would say something along the lines of, "This all feels like an inadequate reward for your efforts," or "I feel bad that I can't afford more than this to pay you back," usually followed by a teasing, "I'm sure there's something I can do to make up for it, though." And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I broke my dry spell each summer. I suppose it helped that I wasn't exactly hideous, and that despite being a bit shy and reserved, I could more than hold my own in a conversation. The strange thing is, even though it happened every summer, I never expected it to. It just sort of unfolded that way, every time, without fail. Story 14. This story is about one of my college roommates when we were freshmen. We threw a huge New Year's Eve party in our townhouse apartment, but our neighbor got mad, so we moved the whole thing to another place. There was a girl at the party who was definitely feeling bold, trying to flirt with everyone, but most of us were just trying to have a chill night. She was attractive, though, and definitely not sober. My roommate had been working the late shift at In-N-Out and showed up around midnight, still smelling like burgers and fries. As soon as he arrived, we filled him in on what had been going on. He talked to her for maybe 2 minutes before they both disappeared back to our apartment. And, well, let's just say things escalated quickly under the stairs. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 4 of us crammed inside. I had my own room, 2 guys shared the master bedroom, and our In-N-Out buddy slept on a twin bed tucked neatly under the stairs. Friends were coming in from all over, so the plan was for everyone to crash downstairs. But with the under-the-stairs situation unfolding, that plan went out the window. Everyone ended up sleeping in the master bedroom instead, which made things extra awkward, since the girl had brought along 2 of her friends. Ever have that awkward moment when you're crashing at a friend's place and wake up hours before they do? Now imagine that. Except you're in a stranger's house, waiting for your freshly triumphant friend to wake up so you can finally go home. It's funny to think about now, My wife has hated that girl since high school, almost 15 years ago, and somehow one of the girl's friends ended up being the sister of one of my closest friends today. I'm still friends with her on Facebook, and every time she posts something, I can't help but think, you're the girl who hooked up with the fry guy under the stairs. Story 15. I was working in a camp up in James Bay, and on Saturday nights, everyone usually partied. It was our one break after 50-hour work weeks. I decided to skip the crowd and stay in my room instead, playing what I think was the first BioShock on PC while pleasantly stoned. After a while, a girl I worked with dropped by and asked if she could hang out. I said sure, but warned her I'd just be gaming and keeping to myself. She sat down on my bed and started telling me she was trying to text this guy to hook up, but he wasn't getting the hint. This went on for about half an hour while I was in an increasingly frustrating fight with a big daddy. Eventually, I lost patience, grabbed her phone, and just texted the guy directly, spelling it out for him. He got the message, she left, and I lit another joint. A few minutes later, she came back, saying he'd chickened out, so I figured I'd step in. That was over 10 years ago now. Story 16. One dark night in October of 2004, I was using a bottle of Parrot Bay to keep the cold at bay while a friend and I spent the night testing how far we could drive the Warthog into the various campaign maps. We'd just finished The Silent Cartographer and were rewarded with a closing cutscene of Master Chief standing heroically on top of the Warthog, staring at some random spot on a wall. Right then, my friend got a phone call from his sister. She was in college at the time, attending a party with a bunch of other students. I'd barely ever spoken to her, but apparently there was someone at that party she just knew was perfect for me. After a grim debate over whether to stay put and get trashed on hobo-grade booze or drive out to this mysterious party, we decided the party offered a slightly better chance of being memorable. Now, I've never been much of a party person. Big crowds drain me, pack more than a handful of people into a house, and I'm already counting the minutes until I can leave. But I had my trusty bottle of Parrot Bay, and while its relatively low alcohol content meant I wasn't going to get obliterated, it was a full bottle. At the very least, I could drink enough to take the edge off and not care quite so much about the noise and chaos. When we got to the party, my friend, being the extrovert he is, immediately vanished into the crowd, leaving me stranded in a room full of dance majors who were all loudly, enthusiastically drunk. I stood there quietly judging a man in a suede jacket with tassels who was attempting to impress a girl dressed as a Rocky Horror Picture Show backup dancer by shoving an enormous cucumber down his pants. That's when I heard a soft, sweet voice just outside my line of sight ask, "What are you drinking?" I turned to see a young woman wearing daring lingerie, a pair of fairy wings, and enough body glitter to permanently ruin at least 3 rooms worth of carpet. "Parrot Bay," I said, taking a sip and doing my best to pretend that a mostly naked ballet dancer hadn't just started a polite conversation with me. "What's that?" she asked. "A sort of coconut rum," I explained. "Can I try some?" I looked from the bottle to the mostly unclothed woman. It was my bottle, the one I'd brought from home, and being 20 and something of a shut-in, getting it hadn't been simple. I'd had to call in a favor from an older friend who didn't mind contributing to the gradual downfall of Western civilization. Everyone else at the party was drinking bottom-shelf vodka and natural light, things I couldn't stomach even back then. As I weighed all of this in my mind, it dawned on me that I was spending an absurd amount of time trying to answer a very simple question. So I just nodded and handed her the bottle, and thus began an evening of pleasant conversation as the party meandered to a number of locations before at last coming to an end. The woman and I ended up going home with one of my friend's roommates and sharing a spot on a futon. Part of me wants to say we hooked up. It would make for a neater story, but that's not what happened. I could invent a dozen funny or plausible reasons why we didn't, but the truth is simpler. It never even occurred to me that it was on the table. She needed a place to sleep, and all I could offer was the edge of a futon. The next morning, as she was getting ready to leave, I asked her out on a date. She said yes. We went on 3 dates, kissed once, and then I climbed aboard a series of increasingly uncomfortable airplanes and spent the next year in Iraq. 7 years later, I found myself thinking about her. We'd lost touch long ago, but one night, between semesters, I decided to look her up on Facebook. To my surprise, she was living in a city not far from my school, the same city where my best friend lived, and one I'd be visiting for a few days after dropping off my things. I sent her a message, and she replied with an invitation to catch up over lunch. We met at a cozy little Italian place, and what was supposed to be a quick meal turned into drinks, which turned into dinner, which turned into an invitation to her place to watch Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. The movie was not really my thing, but it hardly mattered. Before long, we were too busy making out to care what was on screen. By the end of the night, it was late, and I was about to head out when she offered me a place to stay. I figured I'd crash on the couch, but she insisted I take the bed, and that's when I learned she preferred to sleep in nothing. Then we went to sleep, and that was that. The next morning, it hit me that I had no idea what was actually going on, so I just asked her point blank if we were dating. She said yes. I went over to my friend's place, took a shower, and sat there for a while trying to process it all. Later, she and I decided to go out again. I was broke, so we grabbed some McDonald's and stopped by a Redbox to rent The A-Team. I couldn't tell you whether that movie was any good because somewhere before any of the trailer scenes showed up, we started making out. That movie never stood a chance of holding my attention after that. And that's how I managed to turn low-grade booze, a kind of naive nobility born from not quite knowing what game I was playing, and a great deal of patience into eventually getting lucky. A few years later, I danced a waltz with her while nursing a brutal hangover. I don't think anyone but the two of us noticed that the music was the title theme from Morrowind. Everyone else was too busy doing whatever random wedding guests do. Story 17. My roommate brought a few friends home from work to have drinks. We all had quite a few, and honestly, I was pretty drunk. As the night went on, one of the girls kept complaining about her toxic boyfriend. It didn't sound like a cry for help, more like a cry for attention whenever the conversation shifted away from her. After the 5th or 6th time she started whining, I lost it. I snapped and said something like, "You keep using that story for sympathy. You sipped are not going to find any here. The story should be 2 sentences. Story: my boyfriend treated me like crap. I left my boyfriend. Sipped." I kept berating her about her lack of self-worth for a few minutes before she suddenly interrupted and asked, "Which bedroom is yours?" I told her it was the one in the back and kept yelling as she walked toward it, throwing her shirt in front of everyone. After she'd been in my room for several minutes, my roommate said, "Dude, I think she's waiting in there for you." "Really?" I asked. Her friend looked at me, raised her eyebrows, and tilted her head like someone explaining something to a small child. "Yes, sweetie," she said. I went to my room, and sure enough, she was already on bed. There was no mistaking the situation. I stood there, dumbfounded, sipping my beer and just watching until she said, "Are you going to, or just watch?" Only then was I even remotely sure she actually wanted me. Story 18. I lived alone in a crappy apartment for several years. A girl moved into the apartment downstairs, and for a couple of months we exchanged friendly smiles and waves now and then. One night, I was sitting there, half drunk, playing World of Warcraft, when I heard a knock at the door. It was the girl from downstairs. "Hi, can I help you?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "I just wanted to hang out." I agreed and let her in. I offered her a beer, which she accepted, and went back to playing World of Warcraft. I was half paying attention to her while still focused on the game when she suddenly said, "Hey, stop playing and look at me." So I did. Then she said, "Will you do it with me?" I was in shock. "What? What did you say?" she repeated. I hesitated, then said, okay. The craziest part about it was that something similar had happened years earlier with a different woman who also lived downstairs. The only difference was, that time I lied and said I had a girlfriend. She was married and weighed about 200 pounds more than me. Story 19. I got a phone call from someone who had misdialed my number. She asked for Ashley, and I told her she had the wrong number, then we hung up. I tried calling her back, but the line was busy, probably because she was calling Ashley. My phone had auto redial, so about 20 minutes later, it called her again. I pretended to be someone she'd met at a party that she and Ashley had gone to. I asked what she was up to, and she said she was hanging out with her boyfriend, her sister, and her sister's boyfriend. I eventually came clean, telling her I hadn't met her at a party, that she'd called me earlier by mistake, and I just thought she had an attractive voice. She apologized for the mix-up, and we hung up. An hour later, she called me back. Her boyfriend was asleep, and we talked for about an hour. We made plans to meet the next day while he was at work. She had just started working as a dancer at an upscale club, so I assumed she was probably attractive, and I was right. We were both clearly nervous. I gave her a shoulder rub while she finished a phone call with her boyfriend, and once she hung up, things quickly escalated. I never saw her again after that. We'd talked about meeting up once more. She even mentioned wanting to bring another dancer, but it never happened. Around that time, I was on trial and ended up going to prison a week or two later. My wife found the woman's number in my wallet, and by the time I was released, it and the rest of my belongings were gone. Story 20. In college, I would shave my head completely. I used an electric razor on my face since I couldn't grow a beard and a blade on my scalp. One day, I asked a friend in the dorm if I could borrow some of her shaving cream to avoid razor burn. She offered to shave my head for me. When she finished, I thanked her and headed down the hall to take a shower. I came back to my room and she was still there ready to finish up. She dove into shaving my head with intense focus. Things quickly got out of hand. We ended up flipping furniture, breaking a desk, and knocking the doors off a closet. It was total chaos, and I almost felt overwhelmed. After that, she became my go-to barber for the rest of the year. Best haircut ever. Story 21. During college, I attended a scientific conference with about 10 other students from my department. Because there was an odd number of males and females, one girl would be lucky enough to get a room to herself. We arrived at the hotel the night before the conference, and all the students gathered in the adjoining rooms to drink and unwind. Naturally, there was plenty of arguing over who would get the single room. Eventually, after a few drinks, all the girls huddled together, apparently to decide among themselves. Once their huddle was over, they rejoined the party. One girl, about whom I only knew her name and that she was recently single, started chatting with me. I asked who had ended up with the single room. She leaned in and said, "The one of us who picks up one of the guys first." I sat there stunned. Then she grabbed my hand and led me out the door, winking at the other girls at the party. To this day, I have no idea why she chose me. Story 22. During my first week of college, I was invited to a drunken movie night. Up to that point, I had never even been drunk, so I knew it was going to be interesting. I arrived at the party, a cramped dorm room, and met almost everyone for the first time. We half-watched Fight Club while drinking vodka and cranberry. It didn't take long before I started feeling it. We hadn't even finished the movie before someone decided to move the party to a friend's house just off campus. When we arrived, I stumbled up the stairs to their door. We were greeted warmly, and the festivities continued. The first thing I did was plop into the first chair I saw, a La-Z-Boy recliner that belonged to the guy whose house we were at. I didn't even know him yet. The moment I sat down, I ended up throwing up on myself, on the way to the bathroom and even in the bathroom. For several hours, I did nothing but occupy the toilet, feeling miserable. People from the party kept coming in to check on me, glancing at my shame, then returning to smoking and drinking. By the time I was finally ready to get up, the party had wound down. I left with some of my new friends and, for some reason, passed out in one of their dorm rooms. A few days later, I got a text from one of the girls I'd met that night. She said she was interested in a casual hookup. I'd barely made any impression. I'd mostly just spent the night dealing with being drunk, so I was completely baffled. The next day, we hung out and ended up having a great weekend together. At the time, I didn't have a roommate, so we spent a couple of days together. After that, we didn't. But we maintained a strictly platonic friendship for the next year. It was actually pretty nice. I still have no idea what possessed her to see something in me that night. Of all nights. Story 23. I randomly added this girl on Facebook because she was cute enough to catch my attention. We chatted online for a few weeks and eventually met up one day with her friend, who I had also randomly added. We all went to a local guy's house known for parties and ended up getting pretty baked. The two girls started arguing over some nonsense about one giving her boyfriend attention or something. I was taking smoke rips back to back while they yelled at each other. Girl one grabbed my hand, pulled me out of the room, and we walked down the hill to my place. I was stupidly high, and she was clearly annoyed. Once we got to my house, I collapsed into my computer chair and turned on some knife party. She lay on my bed and looked at me upside down. I swept her hair out of her face and kissed her forehead to try to make her feel better. She gave me this odd look, and I figured I had done something wrong. She spun around and gave me a mischievous look, and things quickly escalated. That night, with Destroy Them with Lasers playing in the background, we ended up doing it. Afterward, she became a real handful, constantly messaging me and trying to take advantage of me financially, so I ghosted her. Story 24. My brother married a Finnish woman, and they held the wedding in Finland. This time, I had absolutely no intention of looking for any romantic or hookup opportunities. I just wanted to enjoy drinking and visiting my family in a beautiful area. By the end of the night, I was exhausted. We even had to break into our cabin because we forgot the keys. After a day of drinking and dancing, I was ready to crash. I brought my stuff inside, went downstairs, and found a room with 3 beds. I picked one and lay down. Then I thought to myself, I should take off these fancy clothes and shower. So I went and did that. Afterward, I realized some people were heading back to America in the morning, so I figured I should go say goodbye. Then I thought I should have a cigarette before bed. While smoking, I ended up chatting with the bride's cute friend who was also the photographer. When I mentioned I was going to bed, she said, "You're too young to go to bed, have a beer with me." After the beer, she mentioned that she was tired too. Being a gentleman, I led her down to the room where I had my things, the one with the 3 beds. She followed me in and closed the door behind her. That's when I finally realized what was happening. Later, she told me she'd been flirting and watching me all day and thought my complete obliviousness was adorable. Story 25. My first date with my wife was a disaster. She was cold and intolerable, probably because I was an awkward goober. I tried to say the right things, act properly, and not offend her. I had it in my head that the first date should be a polite malady dinner and movie, no alcohol involved. That was a problem, since we both need a little liquid courage for new social interactions. She apologized for being so cold, so I figured I might as well give it another shot. My mindset was, screw it. I'm going to drink, make a complete fool of myself, and if she leaves, at least I'll have my friends. About 9 beers later, I was shouting the most ridiculous, offensive stories I could think of, while half the bar stared awkwardly. She, meanwhile, was laughing so hard she was crying. One of the few lines I actually remember was when she told me about her family's heritage. I blurted out, "Oh, so you're one of them Hispanish." We got back to my place, and I knew my feet were absolutely rank. She excused herself to the bathroom for a moment, a hint I recognized. I quickly took my socks and shoes off, tossed them out the window, and sprayed my feet with some air freshener. When she got back, things escalated, and afterwards she jokingly dug into me about how bad my feet smelled. I laughed it off, and we both had a good chuckle. A few weeks later, she confessed that the first time, her feet had been horribly stinky from work and she had tried to pin it on me. I told her, "No, you didn't have to try. My feet stank too, and I knew it long before we got to that point." Story 26. I got completely wasted and decided to call it a night. I headed upstairs to my room and noticed there were about 5 people in there, but I was too drunk to care. My bed was partitioned off from the rest of the room. At the time, I lived in the attic of my frat house. Think a slanted roof with a wall separating my bed from the rest of the space. There was no door, just an opening, and the bed sat on the floor. I took my clothes off and got into bed, only to discover a woman was already there. I'd never seen her before and still don't know her name. She said, "I don't want anything to happen," and I awkwardly replied, "Okay," giving her a forehead kiss because I had no idea how to act. Next thing I knew, things quickly escalated, and the night turned into a wild, chaotic blur. The next day, I had to visit the student clinic because of a burning sensation and some other issues. It turned out I had contracted non-gonococcal urethritis, a fancy way of saying I picked up an unpleasant infection. I consider myself lucky that was all I got. It also turned out that she had caught her boyfriend cheating earlier that day. I was just an unplanned distraction who happened to show up at the right or wrong time, while her boyfriend was hanging out in my room with the 5 people I mentioned at the beginning of this story. Story 27. In college, during my sophomore year at a fraternity party, 2 girls were dancing together, and one was wearing a lacy blouse. Somehow, the button on her pants got stuck in a hole on the other girl's blouse. As I walked by, they grabbed me and asked for help getting unstuck, which I did. Later that night, I ended up spending more time with one of them, and we hit it off. One night in my dorm, after a long day of work, I was trying to study. There was a raucous party in the hallway and adjoining rooms. Eventually, the partygoers left for another gathering, and things finally got quiet. I thought I could get some uninterrupted studying done until I heard someone in the hallway. A girl was knocking on doors, checking for unlocked rooms, and eventually got to mine. She knocked, and I called out, "I'm studying, your friends left a few minutes ago." She asked if she could sit in my room for a bit to charge her phone before meeting up with her friends again. I got up, peeked through the peephole, and saw a gorgeous brunette standing there. I opened the door. She came in, sat on the futon, and started chatting with me about the anatomy book I was reading. Before long, she was enthusiastically marking up the book with sticky notes and a highlighter, pointing out everything she found fascinating. We ended up dating for about 2.5 years, but eventually parted ways. The right person at the wrong time, with a slight age gap and different life paths. Story 28. A few years ago, I used to post on a relationship forum where I had a bit of a reputation for being a sad sap. One of the female members who happened to live nearby wanted to meet me in person, partly out of curiosity, to see if there was really something wrong with me and maybe figure out why I was so hopeless with women. The night we were supposed to meet, she got lost, and by the time she finally arrived, the place we'd planned to go had already closed, so we ended up at a local dive bar instead. We talked for hours and, before we knew it, it was getting late. She suggested going back to my place to keep talking, since she lived about 40 minutes away. Back at my apartment, we kept drinking and chatting. I was sitting on the couch when, out of nowhere, she kissed me. I had no idea what was happening. Then she said, "Hurry up and bang me." Story 29. I used to work at a call center that employed a few hundred people, so it wasn't unusual to spend months working alongside someone without ever speaking to them. I'd rate myself maybe a 5 at best, but one day this woman walked up to my desk out of nowhere. I'd noticed her before. Tall, tan, and raven-haired, she filled out a summer dress effortlessly. She looks at me and asks, "Do you drink beer?" I'm caught off guard. I'm not exactly the outgoing type, so I just say, "Yeah." She places a sticky note on my desk and says, "Write your address. I'm coming over tonight and we'll have some beer." At this point, alarms are going off in my head and I almost blurt out, "Why?" But I catch myself and scribble down my address. Sure enough, that night she shows up with a dozen beers. We sit around listening to music, talking, and drinking for a while. Then, out of nowhere, she says, "So, I think it's pretty clear we're going to do it, right?" All I can manage is it? She bursts out laughing and says, "Oh my God, the look on your face. Is it really that much of a surprise?" Much later on, I asked her what had ever possessed her to approach me out of the blue, having never spoken to me before, and just invite herself into my life like that. She said, "The weight of the baggage you carry is apparent in everything you do. It's in your words, in the way you move, and it's in your eyes. You looked like you could use a friend, and I thought that could be me." We stayed friends for a long time, right up until she moved across the country. She was incredible, the kind of person who quietly changes your life without ever trying to. She pushed me to start getting help with some mental health issues I'd been ignoring for years. It's been nearly a decade now, and my life is so much better, so much happier than it ever was back then. It's been a long journey, and I owe a lot to many people along the way. But it all started with that one unexpected act of kindness. Story 30. I went to a getaway camp where there was supposed to be a show in the evening. I wasn't really interested and initially turned down the invitation to take part. Fast forward about 8 hours, and one of the people who was supposed to perform a monologue got sick. They asked if I could fill in, and I agreed on the condition that I could bring a cheat sheet. This was about 30 minutes before the show was supposed to start. About an hour later, it was my turn to go on stage. I got a little stage fright halfway through the monologue and completely blanked on my next line. In a mild panic, I started patting my back pockets over and over, trying to find my cheat sheet. It probably took me 5 seconds, but it felt like forever. I managed to finish the monologue and went to sit back down in my spot, which happened to be right behind where I'd just been performing. That's when I noticed a girl sitting there staring at me with this completely bewildered expression. From her point of view, I had just gone on stage, smacked my own butt several times, and then confidently walked back to sit behind her. After a painfully awkward minute of silence, I turned to her, apologized, and tried my best to explain what had just happened. About half an hour later, I got a little distracted and started doodling on my cheat sheet. The girl noticed and began following the movements of my pencil with her eyes. I'm not exactly sure how it started, but soon we were both drawing on each other's hands. As the night went on, we kept talking, laughing, and adding to our little works of art. Eventually, we ended up back in my room at the counselor's cabin, where things naturally became more personal. That night turned out to be the start of my longest relationship so far, and for a while it made for one of our favorite stories to tell at parties. Story 31. After a rough breakup with the mother of my kids, I spent some time in another town staying with a couple of friends. Let's call them A and D. They both worked with a woman whose marriage wasn't going well, and they thought I should meet her. 2 nights into my visit, she came over with another coworker who was clearly trying to win her over, and they were getting ready for their office Christmas party. D had another buddy visiting, and before long, we were all hanging out, smoking, drinking, and getting the coworker thoroughly hammered and stoned. The women eventually left for the party with the thoroughly messed up coworker, and we guys just hung back, talking and joking around for a few more hours. When they came back later that night, we couldn't resist giving the poor coworker a hard time. It was all in good fun, and honestly one of the best nights I've ever had. As things started to wind down, I made a shy, not-so-smooth move. Definitely not my finest moment, and got politely turned down. She made a quick exit, taking her even more inebriated coworker with her. About a week later, while I was visiting my brother in another town, I got a text from the same woman asking if I planned on coming back to Montreal anytime soon. I thought it was funny. I'd already chalked it up as a loss and moved on. A month later, I did make the trip back to stay with A and D. This time it was a quieter evening. No drinking, no chaos, no out-of-control coworker, just the 4 of us hanging out and talking. As the night went on, she and I grew closer, shared a kiss, and the spark that had been flickering before finally caught. We have been together for 8 years now. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.